All of this sounds to me a little Greek. Maybe not even a little, a lot, like Greek. Like, Ya sastikanis kalon kalaises sagapo. However, if it would have sounded a little like Latin, at least I would have understood something. ISM should stand for, oh, sexy man, but it doesn't. It stands obviously for what? Integrated Services Monitoring. Hello? That is so less sexy than, oh, sexy man. But, okay, that's a different story. In my world, which is really cool, in my world, uncompressed is like a musical thought, a musical idea. Compressed, in the same world, is the same musical thought, but channelized, a little more developed, framed a little. Let's say channelized through Robert Schumann. I remember as a kid I was flicking up and down the TV channels, and little did I know that I was flicking up and down compressed, but it could potentially have started out as uncompressed. Let's not forget the inner child within us when we talk business. And there you have it. Robert Schumann, uncompressed, compressed. Now what do you think of that?
Well, here we are again, looking at the subject of integrated services monitoring, except this time we have a little bit of culture in the form of Axel Kolstad. It's not all technical programs that begin with business Schumann, but we like to do things differently here. So last week, Simen, as I said, we were looking at the subject of ISM.
Yes.
And you went through the initial presentation for us. And I think perhaps today would be a very good idea if we carried on that theme by going a little bit more in depth. But I think perhaps first a recap would be an idea, and then perhaps you could progress more into some more of the detail and perhaps even go so far as a presentation, more in depth, hands-on.
Absolutely. You know, I'll do that. So you know, you continue with the recap shortly, and I go and prepare the presentation.
Absolutely.
Okay?
Okay. Thank you,
Basically,
Steve.
very, very good.
So my colleague is working on the actual presentation. Last week, you know, sometimes things don't work 100%, but this week everything is going to be top-notch. Integrated services monitoring is very central to what we're doing, and Simen is now in go mode. Go for it, Simen.
Absolutely, and welcome back to the ISM presentation. For those of you that followed our webinar last week, I'm going to skip a lot of slides here and basically go straight to it. And of course, the integrated services monitoring is an approach to quality that basically is catering for all the layers and all the different types of services, because there's a ton of service. First of all, we have the studio, the contribution lines, the master control room of the broadcaster, and from there on, it distributes all off to, you know, terrestrial, to cable, to satellite, and of course to OTT. And the key thing with integrated services monitoring is to have one system to basically rule them all, or as we said with Tolkien, one ring to rule them all, basically. So the key thing here is to have an easy to install system that contains pretty much everything you need. And it is a culmination of the 16 years of knowledge that we have into this field. And again, the biggest challenge, if you like, is to avoid the extreme complexity of a lot of bespoke engineering. Because bespoke engineering, as we all know from you know, our bespoke shoes and tailoring of nice suits, it's very, very expensive. And of course, not to mention the bespoke cigars that my dear friend Philip smokes. So to reduce this type of cost, having them pre-integrated and prefabricated, if you like, is a very, very good thing. And the key thing, we tried to show all this at NAB, and we built a complete system on the stand, except, of course, there was no NAB. So we then took it upon us to build a complete system here at the HQ. And together with our dear friends at the Peer TV, we then took all their beautiful transmission and of course, contribution lines and other types of equipment, including their pretty cool packetizer for OTT, and put that together with our monitoring solution to provide one very, very strong package so that we can showcase this. Because again, seeing is believing, demo or die is the good old MIT kind of slogan. And with that, I really want to touch upon what is one of the pure benefits of a lot of this. And you wonder why I put up a slide of an old cellular phone. And of course, the cell phone analogy, if you like, is about, we had great smartphones 22 years ago. I had one, and I had one just like this fantastic Ericsson. And it could do anything. It had a touch screen, it had a stylus you can pull out in addition to that, and you could do pretty much everything. I had actually internet-based VT100 terminal on it. So it could do a lot, but it came with a lot of baggage compared to what modern day phones have. And of course, it passed 20 years since those two models. And the biggest difference is, of course, that the beautiful old cell phone came with an amazing array of manuals, because there was nothing intuitive with that phone, even though it could do nearly anything. So you pretty much had to learn via reading and assimilating and trying a lot of how this thing works, because just making a new appointment in the Excellent Diary was, you know, kind of complex. And, you know, it took a while to master this. But today, you know, there's absolutely no vendor that sells you anything of that kind of extremely advanced technology with a manual. It doesn't come with a manual. They all trust that you intuitively know exactly how this works. And that is basically some of the things that we try to do within the ISM framework, so that you will be able to understand how it works without too much training, with too much reading of manuals, and also to be able to go very deep into the data sets that we then will provide you, without again having to go through all this multitude of manuals. So that's the key thing, basically, because all humans now expect intuitiveness in absolutely all modern devices. And why is that? Well, first of all, deep learning takes time. It takes a lot of time, because you have to understand why you actually want to do this way. And that is something that we try to avoid in our GUIs. And we've been doing so for many, many, many years, because if we can present it in a more intuitive way, it will be grasped easier. And also, today's pace of operations, I mean, look at the broadcaster from today. They don't have time to do a lot of, let's say, in-depth, deep understanding, because a normal broadcast engineer will be faced with not only his small part, because in the old days, the engineer was responsible maybe for a camera chain. That was it. Now the engineer has to cope with everything from a camera chain all the way down to OTT distribution. And you know, that's not an easy feat, because the technologies involved are tenfold what it was just 25 years ago. So the key thing here is to again, cater for that pace of operation. And we also noticed one very, very interesting fact when it came to documentation, that it's easier to find documentation when you need it than basically to study a manual. And that is also the shift in modern day kind of learning, that you will seek out the information when you need it more than you actually will load up on all the knowledge and then basically solve the different issues. So that's actually the key thing. And, you know, humankind and also we, to be honest, in the last 16 years has made amazing leaps and bounds in creating ease of use. That's probably one of the things that we're mostly proud of, because creating stuff that is intuitive and easy to understand, that means more simplistic, is very difficult because you don't want to dumb it down. That's not going to benefit anybody. So you have to make it simplistic without sacrificing any detail. So that's basically it. What do you think, Philip?
I think that's a very clear presentation of what we do. There was one thing that you mentioned which I thought was worth talking about, and that is you used the word intuitive on a number of occasions. And you know, when we started the company, we did a transport stream, bit loss over time.
Yes.
And it was fairly straightforward what we were doing. Well, it wasn't to a lot of people, but
well,
it was for us.
Fairly straightforward is that's very. It's an understatement.
It's an understatement, but compared to what we do today, because we do an awful lot today. How do we maintain that element of intuitiveness, given the fact that the complexity, which we say is simple, but the complexity is so enormous because we're putting so much more, there's so much more available today than previously was the case, that you have to look into all the different protocols, etc. How do we do that?
Well, I can give you many examples, but one of the examples that I think really satisfies the necessity of diving deep but also doing it understandable is basically our instrument view for the wonderful VB440 uncompressed video analyzer. Because you then have a very, very outward, easy to use interface, which again is so ridiculously both intuitive and responsive. Yes. That with just presses of some of the buttons, you'll immediately understand how it works. And then the rest is basically kind of self-explanatory. But again, you need a slight pre-knowledge of what are you looking at.
Yes, so you mean with a little bit of pre-knowledge, you have enough then to be able to take you on and more or less fan out and work out how everything else hangs together.
That's very true. And let me give you one more example, which is actually better, much better. I'm sorry I didn't come up with this one in the first place. And that was something we created 14 years ago and 15 years ago, and that was the media window.
Yes.
Because the media window was the first time you could utilize a graphical user interface to immediately pinpoint what was the error. And that's the power of then creating intuitive graphic user interfaces that without even pre-knowledge, at least knowing that there's a signal out there that should be kind of green all the time and be nice, then suddenly you can see spikes and correlate those spikes to actually find out, is there a packet drop on the network? Or is it basically a packet that is being erroneously processed somewhere else? And all this with just looking at the stream.
Yes.
And that was the first time we saw the extreme benefit of having an intuitive graphical representation of signals that wasn't dumbing down, but actually giving more intelligence to the user.
We use something called the media window at that time. If you look at what we do within uncompressed, what is, I mean, we actually patented, didn't we, media window.
True.
What is it that perhaps we've not patented anything for the moment in the compressed world, have we?
Well, the reason why is that we still have the media window. And it's still as useful in the uncompressed realm as in the compressed realm, which is, you know, true to I mean, it's pretty cool that, you know, 15 years later is still standing very, very firm and to the center of all our products. Every single product we make comes with a media window. Because again, it is self-explanatory. So it's very, very, very low threshold to actually start utilizing the equipment to something useful, which basically is why you would purchase it in the first place.
Yes. Well, if you come back to basics and we talk about integrated services monitoring.
Yes.
Perhaps we should flesh that out a little bit, of what we mean. First, each individual word. I mean, integrated. When we say integrated, what do we actually mean when we say integrated?
Yeah,
with what and how and within the system itself? Or?
It's very true. And looking at the integrated aspect is, first of all, my best example is when you fire up the system for the first time. You install a piece of software on a computer. You install a probe somewhere or in your lab or whatever. You turn it on, connect it to the network, and you input the IP address of that probe into the VBC software, and you're on. Those few steps are the only thing you need to do to actually take advantage of the again, pre-integrated system that we have created.
Right.
So that you can start then getting data back to the server, getting reports, utilizing the system to its max extent without actually doing any other installation feat. There is no additional engineering. You can always go in and tweak any kind of setting if you like, but you don't have to.
No.
That's the integration aspect. And that goes not only for some of the probes, it goes for every single probe that we have, and also every single probe we ever made,
yes.
that can actually report back to the VBC and actually give you meaningful data. That's the integrated.
So we said that the VBC is one of the most essential parts of the glue that holds all this together.
Absolutely.
It's what is reported back to. I know that we are very open in the way that we communicate with third party. It's always been part of our philosophy to have that openness. But if you look at the VBC, I think it's one of the unsung heroes of bridge tech, in that it's always the bit that ends up being tacked on at the end of a sale, I've noticed. But in fact, it's the bit that makes the sale in many cases, because it's so useful.
But that is, I like the way you described it as glue, because it really is. It's that element management and also a lot of pure logic that you can use behind the scenes if you like. Yeah. And it's very, very maintenance free. And that's the key thing with integrated. It's pre-integrated into the fabric of how all our probes work. Because our philosophy is that every single probe shall be able to be useful as a standalone probe. You don't need to connect it to anything. And also, we got a huge language called the external integration interface, which basically gives any third party access to every single one of our measurements. So you don't need to use the VBC, and you can use the probes standalone, but you get a huge performance increase when you add the VBC on top of it.
Yes.
And that's also, again, to keep on the integration, it's why we pre-integrated it so solidly. That is so easy to utilize.
Yes. We talked about ISM, so there's the services part. So perhaps you could talk a little bit about what we mean by services? I mean, all services? Yeah.
Well, absolutely. And that's also a key thing that I love, because when we started 16 years ago, the only service we kind of had was transport stream encapsulated packets over IP. That was it, basically. And that wasn't just it, because transport stream is still a very, very complex field. And transport streams are used for a multitude of things, all terrestrial, all cable, all satellite. They use transport stream.
Yes.
And we have one of the deepest analytics that has been built upon for many, many years. But that's only one part of the service. And then you have, of course, uncompressed video. Then you have OTT, and you have different flavors of the different kind of variable bitrate streams. And all these types of services we can accommodate.
Yes.
Because there's not a single service that we can't do, basically. And our goal with integrated services is basically to be able then to say, okay, why not actually compare them against each other, so that basically you can see what's going out of the studio over the contribution links into the master control room, over the terrestrial, and then over OTT, and actually then validate that everything there is basically there.
And then, of course, the last bit of ISM being the monitoring part.
Yes.
Because we mean analytics, deep analytics, operational analytics?
Well, let's say both. And the reason is you need both. Because monitoring is a great thing to just be sure that you know what's going on. And it's like keeping the pulse. And that means that, okay, everything's fine is just as important as, oh my God, something is not working well. So you need to be reassured that everything's working fine. And if, heaven and behold, something does not work, then suddenly you need deeper analytics because you need to find out, okay, where is it? And that means, of course, that if you have a lot of probes at very granular places in your network, you'll find out where.
Yes.
Then the next question is, what actually did happen and what is the error? So that you can start fixing it. And that's why you also need, in conjunction with monitoring, deep analytics. So you can immediately drill down and find out what exactly did go wrong so that you can fix it.
Exactly. They always say that that's the real issue. Fixing the problem is one thing, finding it
Yes.
is the most important part.
Absolutely, and it's kind of underappreciated how you can actually go about finding it. And let's say even inside one building, let's say a big broadcaster, BBC Transmission House, in London, it's a huge building. There's a huge network. There's a lot of equipment. Finding out exactly where the problem occurred is actually going to be quite difficult. And then, of course, you go to big national networks and even global networks for some of our customers, finding out where the problem occurred and what's the downstream consequences is extremely important.
Yes. I suppose that sort of differentiates what used to happen in the past. In traditional broadcast, if something was wrong, you'd go into the head end and you'd look at all the lights and look at the colours of the lights, and if they were red, you left it. You did something about it because it was important. If it was green, you could sort of say, well, I'll fix that later. And so the notice you get the difference between telco-type engineers, networking, and the broadcast engineers, and if something goes wrong, then the telco engineers go to the right and go to their screens.
Yeah.
And the broadcast guys go more to, they look at a picture because they want to see what's happening.
Yes.
And then we've kind of married this very nicely together in what we do with the integrated aspect.
Oh, I would love to have that slide for you right now, Philip, because that was actually the occasion why we named our company Bridge.
That's true, yes, I think about it. Yeah.
It was bridging that telco world together with that broadcast world, because both are very quality conscious.
Yeah.
They're very, very good and deep engineering industries. But the problem was they just did not communicate, because the data set was different. While the telco guys focused a lot about how to secure very, very good data delivery, then of course the broadcasters was more interested in how do we deliver sound and audio well, and that came with a bit different kind of angle. So we took our pride into creating equipment that could bridge that. So that basically, instead of the finger pointing, oh no, it's a network that's in error. No, it's a broadcast signal that is in error. We enabled them to use the same equipment so that they can actually communicate and fix the issue. And that was actually the real reason.
During your presentation, you spoke a little bit about the relationship with the Peer TV, and a press release came out quite recently around the X10. Perhaps you'd like to give us a few details about that as to where...
Yeah, it was very exciting because the X10 has been, and the X20 for that matter, has been Peer TV's absolute premium platform with 40 gig of capabilities on the input and output side, and a lot of processing. So it was very obvious that we really wanted to utilize that as our example of how to create signals. And since we have had for many years our trusted VB440 that can do uncompressed monitoring, it was so obvious to put our monitoring system in front of the X10, look at the signal going into it, using our other equipment, which looked at the compressed monitoring to see what's coming out of it, and then, of course, using our OTT monitoring to see what comes out of the segmenter and the transcoding. And, it fits like hands in glove. And we feel very strongly that if you're going to have a success in the relatively complex chain of delivery over OTT, you need to look at all those different elements. And it was a very educative kind of experience for us as well. And we love the guys at Appear TV. You know, they're very good engineers, and we've found that they got a bit enthusiastic as well, because again they could see what they were doing.
Yes. Well, I suppose we live in kind of parallel universes in a way. I mean, our bit is rather important in terms of we make sure and can prove that it all works.
Yeah.
If we talk about relationships, as we've got a bit of time to spare, obviously we've mentioned Appear TV. Other partners that we work with, can you perhaps tell us a little bit about other partners that we've been working with recently, either in the compressed or the uncompressed domain of the market?
Well, we work with both types, basically, of partners, and some of the coolest partners we have, they kind of bridge these two rounds. Let me give you an example. Our crazy partners from Australia, Techtel.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. They're not really crazy, by the way.
Well, they're absolutely up there.
They're wild and lovable guys.
They are. I use crazy in the most absolutely fun way of describing them, because they understood that, and they attacked the broadcasters very fiercely, because
in a friendly way.
In a very friendly way, absolutely, absolutely. But from a sales perspective.
Exactly. Yeah. The technology perspective.
That's very true. I'm sorry, I'm using all the wrong words these days. Yeah, crazy attack. Yeah. So the key thing was that I joined them in Sydney not too long ago, before this crisis came upon, and we went to one of the big broadcasters and put it on the table, the niceties about uncompressed, which was very well received. But then we started to talk about all the other services they had. And that was one of the key things with our dear friends in Techtel. They immediately understood that broadcasters, they are a bit like telcos these days. And you know, telcos are a bit like broadcasters, but not truly. But the broadcaster, they have their own network, they have OTT services, they have terrestrial services, they have satellite services, they have a lot of contribution links, and of course they have a lot of studios that do uncompressed as well. So they actually need pretty much everything. And that is one of these key elements which helped us to create the ISM in the first place. And that also tells you one thing, because you have also been one of the huge advocates for partners.
Yes.
And we are very, very lucky to have so many of great partners all over the planet. But they learned us one very important lesson, and that is that everything needs to be integrated. And everything needs to function together, because if you go and want to do something special for a customer, you don't expect the customer to only need what he says he needs. He actually needs everything. And that's not just a commercial attitude. It's a simplistic attitude. They need less systems to do more.
Yes.
And that's what we're trying to solve with ISM.
One of the things that you said a lot of things that are interesting, but one of them was according to the customer need. The standard sort of philosophy is that the customer gets what the customer needs, okay, and wants. But I think that from our experience over the past 16 years, is that is not untrue. You know, the customer needs or gets what he needs or wants. But the reality is that often what the customer is asking for is often what is too late almost, because by the time you know, it takes time to develop a product.
Absolutely, and you know,
and so the question then is, do we have to be rather prescient and sort of say, well, I can second guess what you're going to need, and develop along those lines? Would you say that's true for what we do?
Yeah, but I would kind of come from a different angle, a slightly different angle. And the key thing is that if we're not ahead of the industry and creating some of the tools that will help the industry move on, we're not doing our jobs right. Because usually the customer and the end user will have issues with equipment and technologies that are fairly young. And we need them to be on the bleeding edge so that they actually can look for solutions, not only then basically to address some long-standing issues and what I call small things. Because if customers experience problems, they're not always great on explaining what the problem is, because if they were great at explaining what the problem is, they'll solve it immediately. So they need equipment that basically may not even exist to be able to cope with these new problems. And it's our responsibility to use our big ears to basically listen very carefully to what is being said so that we can create equipment that can help solve it. Not just to address small issues that may be a symptom of deeper strategic problems.
That's true. I think our managing director, Mr. Rolf Olmar, said very wisely, he says many wise things, but one thing he said was, our products are probably the most complicated parts of a portfolio that a business partner has, because not only do we have to be able to account for what is now, but we also have to bear in mind that standards are changing, protocols are coming out. It's difficult to know what the future will hold. Our products, our technology has to stand the test of time.
Absolutely.
It has to be able to understand or anticipate what's going to be happening.
But that's actually in a different manner, the same as I try to say, and I believe that most of our technology has proven to stand that test. I used the example of the media window, and media window is still with us 15 years later and still being put front and center because it still is extremely useful. And that is the key thing, that we have to create tools that can help solve the real issues, not only the symptoms.
Yes. I think one of the things we're probably going to look at a later stage, because we've talked about the visualization of information, and of course the media window makes that possible, to be able to visualize it. But we've done quite a lot in the uncompressed domain as well, in the visualization of information to retain that intuitiveness. Now, from a production perspective, there's a way of working in the production world that expects certain things, a raster image, diamond views, all the different things that colorimetry and all the things that are expected. I think we've reproduced this quite nicely in the
well, I would
design.
Let me just, because we're absolutely going to cover that in later episodes, that's for sure. And I would love to go more in detail, but again, we are trying to attack this from a different angle. And the angle is that let's be very interested and knowledgeable about what has been the past.
Yes.
Because the past is extremely relevant to what we're trying to achieve in the future.
Exactly.
Because there's a continuum of then improvement in the whole broadcast industry.
Yes.
But we don't want to copy
the
past, because that makes no sense at all. We need to provide the tools that is modern enough to help with the problems that's going to occur 5 years from now.
Exactly.
That is where we want to be. And we feel that we are on pretty good road on achieving that.
I think so.